In July 1973, the detection of Nixon's taping system would lead to the discovery of the Watergate cover-up, the indictment of key members of the White House staff, and the end of the Nixon presidency.
The lies that had to be told by the administration over Cambodia led eventually to the employment of the plumbers, which was the secret White House team employed to stop leaks, which led to Watergate, which led to the fall of Nixon. So in a way, the bombing of Cambodia was the first step in the chain that led to the fall of Nixon.
Nixon resigned rather than face impeachment. One of the original articles of impeachment addressed the concealment of the Cambodian bombing from Congress. When the impeachment was dropped, so was the investigation into the secret bombing. The new president, Gerald Ford, retained Henry Kissinger as his Secretary of State and pardoned Richard Nixon.
Nixon managed to cop a shameful plea, accept a pardon. His Attorney General, former campaign manager, John Mitchell, is put in an orange jumpsuit and sent down the river. No Attorney General's ever been to jail before. But there are more members of the Nixon group, all of them bound to each other by a criminal understanding. There's only one of them left, of the people who were involved in the foreign domestic crimes of that era.
We're delighted to have such a large turnout tonight for what I know will be an informative and perhaps provocative evening with our guest, Dr. Henry Kissinger.
I would like to point out that for a while I was both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. And the reason I mention that is because never before and never since have relations between the White House and the State Department been as harmonious as they were in those days.
Kissinger has written 3 best-selling books about his life, but in the deed of his government papers to the Library of Congress, he has not allowed anyone else to access them until 5 years after his death.
Was the deed of the paper the right thing to do? Did it further our understanding of how they operated, by putting those papers away? No, of course not. It simply was an act of a man who did not dare to have in his lifetime the real papers and the real documents of his administration become known.
As Secretary of State under Ford, Henry Kissinger still saw conflicts between superpowers extend to the smallest corners of the world. In East Timor, a small island in the Indonesian archipelago, Henry Kissinger saw a communist threat to the global balance of power.
The Indonesian dictatorship thought it would be better if Indonesia occupied and annexed the people and territory of East Timor. So they evolved a plan whereby they took the land and they subjected the people to a campaign of genocide. But what isn't as widely known as it could be, or should be, is that on the day they took that decision, Henry Kissinger was sitting in the room with the Indonesian General Staff.
Good evening. From Jakarta, Indonesia, the latest stop on President Ford's Asian tour.
On December the 5th, 1975, President Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger arrived to meet with Indonesian President Suharto.
The President's Day in Indonesia will be taken up mostly by ceremony.
Ford and Kissinger wanted to strengthen diplomatic ties with Indonesia, a non-communist ally between Australia and Vietnam that controlled crucial sea lanes.
There's more to this trip than China politics and security for Southeast Asia. Indonesia is a major oil producer, and coal reserves have been discovered on the islands. Reasons enough for the United States to want to maintain good relations.
Dr. Kissinger met with along with President Ford, with President Suharto, and I was present at that meeting. Many have interpreted that meeting as Dr. Kissinger's giving a green light to the subsequent Indonesian invasion of Timor.
East Timor was seeking its independence from Portugal. Kissinger had long been aware of the growing popularity in East Timor of a left-wing independence movement called Fretilin.
The Indonesian military throughout this period was concerned that there not be a separate independent entity developed on one half of one of their islands with strong Chinese communist influence. When Dr. Kissinger came, I think the decision had already been made by the Indonesians that the efforts to negotiate with the Portuguese had not come to fruition, and therefore they needed to take direct military action.
But any military action would involve U.S. weapons, which had been sold solely for self-defense. On December 6, as Ford and Kissinger concluded their visit, preparations were underway for an invasion.
Why, they ask, are the Indonesians invading us? Why, they ask, if the Indonesians believe that Frettel is communist, do they not send a delegation to Dili to find out? Why, they ask, are the Australians not helping us? When the Japanese invaded, they did help us. Why, they ask, are the Portuguese not helping us? We're still a Portuguese colony. Who, they ask, will pay for the terrible damage to our homes?
One day after this report, Greg Shackleton was killed in East Timor.
What we saw was the massacre of thousands of people as a result of the constant attack of the Indonesian army, from the air, from the sea and land attack.
A lot of people are being killed, I repeat, indiscriminately.
With no cameras to witness the invasion, a radio transmission from the Red Cross is the only live record of the horror of the event.
What I saw was that my own government was very much involved in what was going on in East Timor. We were providing most of the weaponry, helicopters, logistical support, food, uniforms, ammunition, all the expendables that the Indonesians needed to conduct this war. You can be 100% certain that Suharto was explicitly given the green light to do what he did.
The invasion, executions, destruction of the land and resulting famine cost the lives of over 100,000 Timorese. In interviews, Kissinger has long denied that he discussed the invasion in the meeting with Suharto.
We were told at the airport as we left Jakarta that either that day or the next day they intended to take East Timor.
Well, I don't want to take issue with the accuracy of Dr. Kissinger's memoirs, but it was mentioned in the meeting with Suharto. As I recall, Suharto was quite candid, said that after several months of trying to resolve this through negotiation, the Indonesians felt they had to take direct action.
1 week after this interview, the transcript of the meeting with Suharto was released. Suharto: I would like to speak to you, Mr. President, about another problem, Timor. We want your understanding if we deem it necessary to take rapid or drastic action. Ford: we will understand and will not press you on this issue. We understand the problem you have and the intentions you have. Kissinger: you appreciate that the use of U.S.-made arms could create problems. It depends on how we construe it, whether it is in self-defense or is a foreign operation. It is important that whatever you do succeeds quickly. We would be able to influence the reaction in America if whatever happens, happens after we return.
And the U.S. government knew exactly what was happening in those first days of the invasion, December 7th, 8th, 9th. Thousands of Timorese were killed.
Reports of people being herded into school buildings by Indonesian soldiers, with the buildings set on fire, and anyone trying to get out being shot, but most of the people being burned alive. People being herded into fields and machine gunned. People being hunted down in the mountains, so anyone out there was in what amounted to a free fire zone.
The Indonesian